Honestly, I think the only reason we even need governments in order to, regulate certain things in society is because money exists. Right? Because if money didn't exist, right, and let's just say commerce and trade, businesses still existed, right? People were still going around selling their services and their products and yada 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 yada, but money didn't exist, right? So hold on, let's actually look at that for a second. How would that work? What would it be like if money never existed, but everything else was still basically the same? Okay, this is what it would be like. Okay, you go to work, you do your job, and it could be any. You could be an independent contractor, sole proprietor, work for another business. You could be stocking shelves. You could be providing business to business service, whatever the case it might be, right? You could be the business owner, a manager, the employee, whatever the case is, right? You provide a service to society, right? And therefore, it's just simply understood that you have the right to access the services and products of others in society, right? That's how it would be if there was no money, right? Because yeah, there it is. Okay, so that's how it would be if money didn't exist, right? I mean, if money never existed and we still ended up evolving a complex society, right? Because you don't need money for these things, right? Look all throughout nature. Everything is transient and indirect exchange, right? There's no like, hey, I'll give you some of this nutrient if you'll give me some of this nutrient. There's none of that actually happening, right? What is actually happening throughout nature, and the best example I always come up with is the root systems of a forest, and the mycelium network that connects them all, right? Is basically the mycelium network is acting like a super brain amongst the network of all the roots, which its brain is everywhere. It knows everything that's everywhere. It knows every nutrient in that forest, where it is and how much supply it has, right? And it just automatically regulates the distribution of those resources, right?
Yeah.
So how does that happen? Well,
It governs it.
a tree over here in this part of the forest suddenly says, hey, I'm deficient of this nutrient, right? It sends a signal down into the soil below it. I can't remember all the technical terms from way back when I researched this stuff, but it sends a signal down into the soil, which basically tells the mycelium network, because the communication travels much faster through the mycelium network, tells the mycelium network that this tree needs these nutrients and this much of it, right? And this mycelium network knows exactly how much nutrients all the other plants and all the other soil contains all around it. And so this tree over here says, well, I have a surplus, right?
So it helps it out.
So the mycelium network says, all right, give me your surplus and I'll give it to this guy because he's deficient, right? And it just automatically happens, right? And this is indirect and transient exchange, right? Happens all throughout nature. No, it doesn't happen in the animal kingdom necessarily. The animal kingdom is a second density life form, so it follows a hierarchical structure based on group consciousness. And that's why we third density creatures do, because we just evolved from that, and we haven't yet evolved beyond the hierarchical structure, but we're about to. And that's where the plant kingdom is at, right? They're the fifth density layer, right? The planet Earth is the fifth density of our, next level higher self, right? And we're evolving into the fourth density at this moment, which is the collective consciousness of humanity, right? And so we now need to start learning from the fifth density part of this planet, which is the plant kingdom, right? And how that operates. Okay, so if we take how the root system of a forest distributes resources throughout the forest in order to create an extremely abundant forest, and apply that to our economics, right? We don't need money to transact anything, right? I'm giving a service to this business is giving its service to its community. And because I'm giving my service to this business, I have the right to partake of the products and services of others in society, right? And on the business side of things, right, the ones that are taking in the massive amount of raw resources in order to produce the products and services that everybody partakes of, right? That's where you should see this mycelium network, right? It's just like the Venus Project, right? With Jacques Fresco, where they advocate what they call a resource-based economy, right? What they're actually advocating is the exact same thing that the plant kingdom has been doing for eons right under our very noses, right? Where like they talk about having a computer system, right? A decentralized computer system that knows where all the resources are and in how much quantity, and which business has a surplus of this and which business has a surplus of that. And the great thing about that is, if you don't have any money and you're therefore recycling all of the materials you use because you don't have to worry about losing profit over it, right? Because it's just the right thing to do. Well, now every business that's recycling these resources also has a surplus of materials that they don't even use, because these are recycled resources from what we did use.
And somebody else.
And we don't use these because it doesn't have to do with what we build, so we need to give it to the rest of society. Well, this AI network of decentralized network throughout the world that knows where all the resources are can basically just say, all right, these people over here need this resource and you have it, so please send it to them, right? Send this much to them, right? And let's say they need some of those resources, right? So everybody's always putting into the system, right? We have X, we need X, So the system always knows, and it just automatically, just like a mycelium network throughout the forest.
Yeah.
Right? So that's really what the Venus Project is advocating. I don't know if they've ever put it into those words before. I don't know if they've ever compared it to the plant kingdom before, but that's exactly it right there. And that's the kind of economy that we need in the future. This is what it would be like if money did not exist. All right? So, and the beautiful thing about that is because if that's how it works without money, what does that mean? That literally means everybody's getting their equal yet undivided portion of this divine estate that is the planet Earth, right? Equal yet undivided. What does that mean? That doesn't mean like you take a certain number of dollars and equally distribute it amongst all the people, okay? Because that's an equal and divided portion, right? So what does equal yet undivided mean, right? It means equal access to the products and services of society. That's all it means, equal access.
Equal access,
right? Right? So now what most people would normally understand that as in today's way of thinking is equal buying power, right? Which translates into an equal amount of money or credit, right? But see, this is where it goes backwards on you, because now you're talking about equal and divided, right? So what happens if it's all divided? Well, now we all start spending it. What happens when we all start spending it? Well, it just goes right back into the hands of the 1%. Nothing changed. Okay? So the only way to have an equal yet undivided portion of this divine estate that is the planet Earth, the only way is to have equal access to the products and services. And for that, you do not need money. You don't need anything. And maybe at first, because humanity is so skeptical. Sorry. Maybe, give me a minute. Maybe at first, because the fuck it.
Mycelium and everything, and everybody distributing things in the proper way. Yeah, that's what I've been saying.
It's
too.
basically legal today. Why should I bother if, my audience sees me smoke a bowl on YouTube? Whatever.
But make them like you even more.
Maybe. I don't know. Whatever. In any case, fuck was I talking about?
Yeah, about like.
What was I talking about?
And about like the natural societies and.
The end of money. We need to make the end of money. We need to create the end of money. And since people are going to be skeptical at first of what it would be like without money, there has to obviously be a system in place to end that skepticism, right? People are going to want to know, are you really providing a service to society? Because this is just the way
Hopefully
people
everybody
are,
in their houses
especially
does.
Americans, because we're such a fucking compassionate race of people. My goodness gracious. Wow. Are you really serving? Does it fucking matter? I mean, there's an abundance for everybody, whether they're serving or not. But, people are going to want to know, are you really serving? Are you really disabled? Are you really retired? So, we're going to have a government at first. That's how this conversation got started originally, that we don't actually need a government if money didn't exist, right? But we have a government now, and we have money now, so we need a government now. So how do we transition to a world where we don't have money and therefore don't need a government anymore? Is thought processes, so many different ones going on. Slow down.
Right.
Usa. Namaste. I get so passionate about this. How do we get to a world where money doesn't exist so that government does not have to exist? Well, first, you have to create an alternative society, like what I call the United Network of Humanity. And you build it with the meritocracy. And you create its own central banking system. And how does that central banking system work? The central banking system works pretty much the same way this one does, but with a very small tweak to it, right? So how does this current central banking system work? Well, everyone has the ability to create money, right? It's called credit. You go and take out a loan. Well, guess what, buddy? That's not the bank creating money. That's you creating money, right? Because the money's created based on your signature, right? Because all that money is based on the promissory note. What's the promissory note? A little piece of paper that you sign that has a little dollar value attached to it in the loan processing agreement form, okay? That document has the legal power by decree of law to create the fiat currency in the US dollar as a credit, which the second you obtain that money, therefore becomes a debt. Okay? So this is how that works, all right? Now, so how does Holobank work, right? The central bank system that I advocate. Holobank works by keeping with the same principle, allowing you to create money, except instead of creating it as a loan, you create it for every transaction, right? So instead of spending money, you create money for the transaction. So if you go into Stop and Shop and you swipe your card for the groceries, instead of that money coming out of your bank account and going into their bank account, you're basically just telling Holobank to say, okay, create money and put it into this bank account. You've lost nothing, they've gained something, right? So, by doing that, the other thing is it's not a debt. Right? Once it's created, it's not a debt. It does not have to be paid back to that bank. Okay? So what that does, therefore, is for everybody that is part of the United Network of Humanity, is it allows them equal access to all the products and services of society. Right? Because they don't have to worry about if they're making enough money from their job, right? All they have to know is that, well, I'm serving my society, so I have this card from my business that links to Holobank, right? The central banking system. It's got my name on it, my ID number, and I swipe this card at a store, and it creates the currency and sends it into their bank account. It creates it at first in their currency, but if it lands in another person's bank account that's in a different currency, it just automatically translates to that currency. Right? So, in a sense, that's kind of illegal, right? Because that's counterfeiting, technically speaking, right? Except that, it's the same thing when their government does it, but they have permission to do it, so, they get away with it. So basically, all that means is we just need to get permission from the Security Exchanges Committee or whatever, the SEC, to basically have permission to fluidly exchange our currency with other currencies, right? And then it would be no different than exchanging a USD for a euro, and now it's not counterfeit, right? So that's all we got to do is get permission for that after creating or as part of our creating our own central banking system. And if we can accomplish that, then it would spell a lot of, it would give 100% freedom, equality, and sovereignty to everyone in the United Network for Humanity, right? And I think, personally, that the SEC and other governments would allow us to liquidly exchange our currency for others, for mostly the sole purpose that there will be more money coming from our currency into their currency than from their currency into our currency, which allows them to pay back the interest on their debts.
That'd be cool.
Right? And if they can pay back the interest on their debts, what does that mean? That means the value of their money starts going back up.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a win-win situation.
Bang, boom.
So I think they'll let us do that.
That'd be awesome.
And that's how, right? And so, okay, so that's half the story, right? So once we do that, right, now how do we actually get rid of money for good? Well, as the United Network for Humanity continues to grow, right, because as it continues to grow, other people are going to be like, hey, I kind of really like the way that works. It's probably going to grow faster even than I think it will. I'm thinking it's going to take maybe 200-300 years to reach this point, but who knows? After inception, maybe it'll only take 20 or 30 years. I mean, the world's changing a lot faster these days. It's really hard to keep up. You just never know what's going to happen these days. But either way, I mean, eventually the society grows to such an extent where it doesn't need to do business outside of itself anymore, which means now it's just creating all this money amongst itself that it never has to spend, because our system works based on just creating money, not spending money. So now this money is just uselessly piling up with nothing to do and no purpose whatsoever. And so the people themselves will say, hey, why do we still have this formality? Fuck's the point. Let's get rid of it, right? And then what happens shortly after that? There's no money anymore. Everything's just, you don't, probably a lot of things start getting more relaxed because there's a lot more technology that makes a lot more abundance and frees up a lot more people's time, so you don't have to, 100 years from now, maybe not even that, maybe 30 years from now, 95% of humanity will be out of work. There won't be anything for us to do except think about what to do next. What could I do? What might I be able to do? That's about the only thing we're going to have left to do, once technology finally gets being released, technology that's already existed for many decades now. Yeah, so, and once that happens, and you don't have to work, you don't have to serve, everything's fucking free all the fucking time, and it doesn't fucking matter, right? And everything's just like, hey, I have an idea that'll benefit, alright, let's give that a try, or otherwise it's just leisure, what do you need a government for? So that's going to come to an end eventually, right? So, there's a lot of people that do talk about, anarchy, you don't need the government, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, that's the end goal. That is definitely the end goal. We're getting there. But we're talking about billions of people that are completely indoctrinated into slavery. And we have to make this a slow transition, right? Because it has to be the masses' decision, right? And so that's why I came up with this whole plan to create this alternative society with an alternative banking system and an alternative currency that does things differently, so that we could eventually get to the point where people start to question, why do we even have the formality that is money anymore? What's the point? And hopefully I'll get to see that decision in my lifetime, because that means we eventually definitely will actually get to that end goal.
Eventually.
So that's kind of the grand plan. My contact information is freely available, and my books are available on Amazon. There's a link down below in the description, so if you're interested in more information, obviously check out those sources. And obviously hit me up anytime to, communicate and talk about this. Obviously, I can't do it alone. A society is made of many people. So it's up to you, really, whether or not you would like to see this happen.